Well, Jim, thank you for taking the time. It's good to see you again. We'll be talking today a little bit about the midterms coming up shortly now. First things first, you've been following congressional politics for a long time now and been living here in DC as well for several years. How would you characterize what we are witnessing right now in terms of the midterm campaign so far?
Well, I think it's a continuation of the polarization of our voters, and they're expressing themselves at the ballot box. And one thing is that people blame Trump for the polarization and tribal activity. It's been going on for almost 30 years. Second thing is this is likely to be a wave election, meaning a wave will take over the House of Representatives, and there's a majority of 23 for the Republicans now. If they have 25 or more, I'd be surprised. I think it's going to be tighter than a lot of people think. Why? Because of redistricting. Much of the redistricting in the United States, the lines for the district were drawn by Republican state legislatures and governors, and they sort of protected themselves. However, this time we have more competitive districts than we usually have. We have 55 races that are, quote, toss-ups. We usually have 30. That's enough to make a difference. It looks like the House will be Democratic. If that happens, there'll be oversight hearings. There'll be pushback on this president. There'll be some embarrassments for the presidents because there's a certain amount of conflict of interest, even corruption, it looks like, by this administration, and the House will pursue that. The Senate has 1/3 of its members up every 2 years. This year, the Democrats have 26 people running, or seats that are Democratic, and 9 for the Republicans. Out of the 26, about 8 of them are toss-up races. At this point in time, it's hard to tell what's going to happen, but it looks like maybe the Democrats will lose some of those seats and that the Republicans will gain more. Right now it's 48 seats to 52. I don't think that it'll be like the House of Representatives, and so therefore we will have true divided party government with a Republican in the White House, Democrats in the House, and a Republican in the Senate. So we'll have a continued gridlock unless there's a crisis. It will be very hard to get anything done, but the House of Representatives will be very active in their role of checks and balances and oversight of the president and the executive branch.
How big a game changer will it be to the dynamics right now in Washington federal politics if the House goes to the Democrats?
I think it's a significant change. I think, in fact, the Senate Republicans may like it because they can reach out and work with some of the people in the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives and maybe get some legislation through, like the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, as an example. Senator Alexander from Tennessee is a moderate kind of guy, and he'll go along with what Democrats want. And I think we'll see the Senate going after the president a little bit on trade. They don't agree with him on all of these tariffs, and the House will certainly reinforce that through the hearings that they have. They don't have the authority to pass trade agreements. I think that there'll be some turnover in the executive branch because of people like the Secretary of Interior. His name is Zinke from Montana. He's being investigated for 18 potential felonies at this point. Pretty corrupt. House will go after that. By the way, the House will go after the president's taxes because he's refused to show them. He's the first president in almost 30 years to do that. Some people think that that will show where the money came from for his companies, and it may have come from the Russians through Deutsche Bank, and that's quite controversial. They'll continue the Russian investigation also, and the Russian intervention not only in the presidential election, this election, and in other elections in Western Europe.
Mm-hmm. We've seen quite a few candidates from the left wing, Democratic Socialists, they've called themselves, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ariana Parsley, and so on. What will this mean for the structure within the Democratic Party that some of these left-wing candidates will now be part of the likely majority in the House of Representatives?
Well, I think this will be a struggle. When you're in power, sometimes it's hard to keep everybody together, but it's certainly not like the Freedom Caucus on the far right of the Republican Party right now. Almost 50 members, or before that, the Tea Party. These people believe in government. They believe government is not bad. They just have different approaches as to what should be done with government for problems of health care and jobs and Social Security, retirement. They will pull the party or try to a little far to the left. I don't think they'll have that much power. The first test of that will be the selection of a new leader, maybe a new leader in the House of Representatives. Pelosi said that she wants to run again, but the whole word is that she'll run, she'll be temporary, and then there'll be a change in leadership. She's in her 70s. Other people are in their 70s in the Democratic leadership in the House, and a lot of people say, hey, it's time to have younger people. That's different than the expression of so-called democratic socialism, and of course it's nothing like socialism in Europe at all, and it's just a new title. There are people who just want to use the state to help people. It's not like taking over the private sector or anything like that, like some socialist situations. I think that it will resolve itself. I think they're mature enough in the Democratic Party to come together, realize they have to be together if they're going to fight Trump, and that will go on.
Now that you mentioned the leadership situation with Nancy Pelosi and whether or not she will become Speaker again if there's a Democratic majority, the way I hear you, it seems that she is the most likely to become Speaker again, but you're also referring to some rumors that she will then resign after a little while. Who is then likely to replace her?
Well, that's sort of an open question now as to who would replace her, or who would replace the other positions like the whip and the majority leader, those kinds of people. I actually don't know. There are a lot of people that would like to have that position. Tim Ryan from Eastern Ohio, so Appalachian Ohio, where they have a lot of opioid problems and unemployment. He represents people that really supported Trump, but they supported him as a Democrat. He got 75 votes last time at the beginning of this Congress against Pelosi. He's someone who would like to be Speaker. A lot of other people say, well, what has Tim done for me now? What's he doing for me now? Meaning, has he brought in money to help me win my election? Pelosi has done that. That's a very powerful thing. She's brought in hundreds of millions of dollars to help people, which creates loyalty to her. But she knows she needs to move on, I think, and she will. I do not know who the next Speaker will be. There are lots of rumors, but I think that nobody knows at this point.
If the situation, which is the less likely right now, which is that the Republican majority is maintained in the House, we also face a situation where a new Speaker is to be found, either Kevin McCarthy or Steve Scalise. Where is the situation right now as you see it?
Well, if the Republicans take over in the House, the president will not be contained. He will continue to push a pretty populist, right-wing, erratic agenda. They won't do much about it. In terms of the speakership, that's very important in terms of trying to moderate what the president does and work with the Senate. It looks like McCarthy has the lead on that, that he would become Speaker. But even more importantly, in my opinion, there are 9 chairs in the House of Representatives that did not run again because the joke is they discovered their families. They want to be with their family. Now, it's a surprise to the 16-year-old son in the family that they want to come home and see them, including Ryan's 16-year-old son. But that's what they said. No, they thought they'd get beat. They thought this was a wave election, and they got out. So you have all new chairs. I mean, really, on the major chairman of the Appropriations Committee, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Tax Committee, for the Republicans. But we also have it for the Democrats if they come in. That makes a difference. It makes a difference in terms of oversight. It makes a difference in terms of what legislation they push. That makes a difference in terms of style and personality of the chair and the subcommittee chairs. So that's something to watch very carefully.
I remember back when you and I spoke about the situation with Congress just a few months after President Trump was sworn in, that you predicted that there was likely to become a switch in terms of power structures here in Washington because the new president was not that familiar with the dynamics in this town. So far, how is that prediction going, you would say, in terms of the Congress regaining some power?
Well, usually when you have unified party government, the same party in the House, the Senate, and the White House, you have a great deal of success in getting things through. Obama had a 93% presidential support score. It's like a batting average in baseball. He got 93% of what he wanted, he got through in the first 2 years. 338 bills, major bills. Affordable Care Act, financial, institutional reform, Dodd-Frank, a lot of other things. Very successful, as Clinton was in his first 2 years until a wave election came and wiped out his majority as it did with Obama. This guy, this president, has had no success. One bill. The tax bill is the major bill that has come through, a big tax break for corporations, and it really hurt everybody else, it looks like. And one of the reasons is he didn't play well with others, like you learn in kindergarten. He criticized his own leadership. He didn't coordinate with the leadership. You have to have a clear strategy, theme, and message. Rank order what you're going to do with the most important things first, and go forward with that and continue with persistence and focus. He has not done that. In the middle of something that should be very easy to pass, the infrastructure bill, that's a bill building roads and repairing bridges, building bridges, dredging harbors. Everyone wants that, Democrats and Republicans. That should have passed a long time ago. During the consideration of that, he's had 5 launches of the infrastructure bill. And then the next day he tweets on something totally unrelated, and the focus goes on that. So my moles on the Hill, my former students, I now have 212 former students that work in Congress. They tell me from the leadership offices that the president is just so undermining their capacity to get movement on things that it's very frustrating. So it hasn't been very successful with him, and I think it might be even more successful with a Democratic House, because maybe they'll get together with the Senate and they'll move some things a little more easily against what the president wants in some cases, like trade.
How would you characterize the relations so far with between the president and the Republican leadership, with Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, who is now soon to be ex-speaker?
The relationship between the president and the leaders in the House and the Senate of the Republican Party from the beginning has not been good. They came out against him, and then later they said, well, you're the nominee, I'll help you, sort of reluctantly. He has criticized them live on television out of the Oval Office when Democrats were there negotiating on things. He's pushed things that they don't want, making it very hard to get things done, like expanding the wall on the southern part of the United States to keep people out. They really don't have a majority for that at all, and he keeps wanting to push that. He's promised that to his base, this populist argument, so he keeps pushing it. They have an agenda that's pretty clear about what they want to do, and they can't get it done. They did with the tax bill, but you know, my comment is they got the tax bill done because the president got bored with it, didn't understand it, didn't focus on it, and they got it through in spite of him, in my opinion.
We are now, with the midterms done, 2 years away from the presidential elections. It's not unlikely that quite a few of the candidates running against the president is to be found on Capitol Hill. Who do you see right now could be some of the senators going against him?
Well, the incubator of ambition is the Senate, and it's hatching several people who are very interested in becoming President of the United States. Cory Booker from New Jersey is one. Harris from California. There's probably 6 people, maybe even more inside, that would like to run. They think, oh, I'm just as smart as this guy, especially this guy, but compared to everyone else. I think the next nominee from the Democratic Party is unknown, but it's likely to come from a governor, as someone who can say, I'm not part of Washington, I'm not part of that corruption. They run against Washington, as Obama did, as Trump did. It's hard to run out of the Senate as a candidate for the presidency because it's really, you've got to be unemployed to do it because you're out on the road all the time. Bernie Sanders is in play. I don't think he has a chance. And then to go into the Democratic Party and people out of government, Joe Biden wants to run, and he's gone to 26 states, 54 congressional districts so far before the election, helping people, giving speeches. He's 75. Most people in America think that's too old. He doesn't. He's full of energy. I think that Klobuchar is another person. It may be the year of the woman because there's several women that are running. By the way, this year in the midterm, it is the year of the woman. Almost twice as many women have run for the House and the Senate and governorships in America. And they ran in the primaries, and there are many still left running, and they're doing pretty well. It's the year of the woman in the sense that women, 66% of women, if you do a meta-analysis of a bunch of polls, 66% of women in America do not like Trump or what he is doing. That's a significant percentage. The Democratic Party is appealing to them and appealing to independent women in America. So watch women this time in terms of the vote, the candidates, and what they do after they get into office, and whether they run for the presidency or not.
One of the women that really is becoming, one of the new stars in the Democratic Party, within the Senate at least, is Kamala Harris from California, who also played a major role in the Kavanaugh hearings recently. You mentioned before, Jim, that it's hard to run as a senator, and we've only seen, well, we saw Obama, but even though he was a senator, he wasn't really working that much. And then we need to go far, far back in history to find the next example of
John F. Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy,
Right.
exactly. And that's the point, Jim. Why is it then that every time we see all these senators trying to reach for the presidency, they must also be a little aware of history and the fact that it's hard? Why do they do it then?
Well, John F. Kennedy ran and he won, and a lot of people didn't take John F. Kennedy very seriously in the Senate. He didn't work very hard. I think the Senate is a incubator of ambition because people have really the coals of ambition, and you get close to the power and you say, God, I can do that. And so they run and they give a speech or two. They go around the United States. It seems like people are supportive of them. They've got a lot of people saying, you should run. These people have ego issues. Kennedy did, everybody did. The president does especially. He's hedonistic and he has needs to have people love him. And a lot of people are that way also. I think women are less that way than men, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, certainly Hillary was quite different than that. And maybe that's one of the reasons people thought she was somewhat cold at times, because she didn't need all that adulation externally. I've worked in the U.S. Senate. I've been in hearings where I've seen people. Well, I worked for Barack Obama. I was surprised he ran. He didn't know anything about management, but he was smart and he worked hard, and in the end he did pretty well. But after 2 years in the Senate, it's not good, and in the state legislature, it's not great preparation to run a bureaucracy of 2 million and about 2 million military people. It's hard, but he learned, and he didn't make too many mistakes. And the most important thing is, in his case, there were no scandals, because he had a very high ethical standards, whereas there were dozens of scandals before Trump was even inaugurated, and there are more going on now.
It's not a secret that the U.S. Congress is not exactly winning any awards in terms of popularity among the average American right now. Right now, Real Clear Politics average is an approval rating on 12%. 12%. and yet I don't know about you, but I have yet to meet some of those ones who are the 12%. Is there any chance in the next 2 years at least that we will see this number starting to rise and the approval of Congress will then somehow start to reappear among the average Americans?
Congress is in the cellar with respect to people that think it's doing a good or outstanding job. That figure right now is 12%. When it was at 15%, former Senator John McCain said, that seems pretty high. Maybe they allowed a lot of people from Capitol Hill to be in the survey. Yeah, it's been very low. It goes up high when we have crises. When we had 9/11, George W. Bush went from 48% to 91% in 1 week, but the Congress went from the 30s to 68% in the polls, but then it dropped off. They are gridlocked, tribal in terms of their arguments. They're not getting things done. That's part of what Obama captured, but also Trump in another way. I'm going to change the way Washington works, or I'm going to drain the swamp not only of lobbyists but also the leaders to get things done, Trump said. So that appeals to these people who are trying to change Washington. I don't see a change after this election. I think, especially because of Trump, it continues to be highly polarized. His populist arguments are not healthy to bring people together on the Hill. But there will be exceptions. Different policies drive different politics. The reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, we may come together. The infrastructure, we may come together on that. We may come together, Democrats and Republicans, on a variety of other things, as we have recently on attacking the opioid problem in America, having a gag rule change. When you go to a pharmacist in America, now you can find out the prices of the same drug, a variety of prices depending on the insurance or whether you're just paying for it. There was a gag rule where the pharmacist would not allow you to do that. That's low bore, that's very small, but at least people came together and almost passed unanimously in the House and the Senate to change for that. So there are certain things where you can come together and it will be better. But let's put this in perspective. In the late 70s, early 80s, about a third of the House and the Senate voted together in the middle. That was the sweet spot for governing. Now it is 4%. 4% in the House and the Senate vote together. And so there's these two extremes on the left and the right, and the real election usually is the primary election, reinforcing these people to stay pure on the right and left. If you don't, you get primaried, as happened this time in both parties, and people don't want to move away from that. They want to get reelected. In the end, you have to ask, well, why did you get elected? It was because of your principles and to get things done. Why do you give up so much? Because you're afraid you're not going to get elected. In 25, 35, 40 years ago, you had people who were willing to stand up and say, I know you disagree with me, but this is why I'm voting this way. And they still got elected. The person I worked for, Senator Hubert Humphrey, used to do that. He'd go back to Minnesota and he'd say, you know, the polls say you don't agree with me, but this is why I'm doing this. I've listened to all these experts. And he still got elected at very high rates. That has to happen. We have to change redistricting. We have 6 provisions on the ballot right now in 6 different states to have commissions do redistricting. Commissions do redistricting in the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. We have it in 11 states, including California, and they have more competition in those states. We've got to do that so we have districts that are competitive. That will bring about a little more moderation, I think, in the House. Senate's different. The Senate is the most malapportioned legislative assembly in the world because you have California and then you have North Dakota. They both have 2 votes. Yeah. California, you'd have to have 20 states to add up to the population of California. That's 40 votes versus 2 votes in California. That is continuing to be a problem. It will be a problem in the future. We have to amend the Constitution, but we won't, because you have to pass it through the states, and the states won't agree with a proportional representation approach from the states.
Final question, Jim. Right now, there's quite a bit of talk about whether or not it will be an advantage or a disadvantage for the president if the Democrats is taking back the House. The argument that is an advantage is because then he can have an enemy, someone to blame, someone to bash. Disadvantage, of course, then there goes all future opportunities in terms of passing legislation. Which one do you lean in favor of those arguments?
I think that the president is unique in the history of the United States, that his primary goal is to be in the press all the time, that he doesn't have a strategy and tactic with respect to a core philosophy. That affects this question. I think that it will be better for our democracy to have divided party government in the future, because it'll force the leadership in the House and the Senate to come together and move ahead without the president. The president is almost random in his behavior. In my opinion, it's dangerous also. Now, in terms of power, I think that certainly the House will be attacking him and will reduce his power, and maybe many of the Republicans in the Senate will have cover so that they'll go along with that. He, on the other hand, may reach out, work with the Democrats, and build coalitions with the Senate, but I've seen no indication of that. He's not pragmatic. He is really quite random. And I don't believe human behavior is random. I think there's some reason for why he's behaving this way, but random politically. And he doesn't believe in the iron law of reciprocity, meaning you help me and I'll help you. He breaks that all the time, and that's the core value in any democracy in the world is, you hurt me, I'm not going to hurt you right away, but I'm going to keep that in mind. You help me and we'll build a coalition and we'll get things done. He doesn't think that way.
So as long as Trump is president, Washington is not going to function the way it should?
As long as he's president, this democracy is in a crisis. And it's going to be very hard to get things done. I'm worried about some kind of external threat to the United States. Usually we have rally effects and we get together and we work. I don't know how he'll behave. I mean, the bumper sticker that I love from 2016, it says, "Trump and Putin make Russia great again," which means it's an indication, he's reaching out to, in my opinion, someone who's an enemy who stole territory from Ukraine and is threatening Lithuania, etc. And he seems to be friendly with him, not criticizing him. Doesn't criticize Saudi Arabia for Khashoggi being killed in a brutal way. So what? Well, it's hard to figure out what he's going to do. It's hard to figure out how the House and the Senate's going to go around him, but I think they will try to go around him. He's not inquisitive. He doesn't. The rumor is he doesn't read the intelligence briefings. He has them orally on a 3x5 card with about 5 bullets, and then he forgets it, gets it mixed up. It is really a unique time for our democracy. I think it's a dangerous time for our democracy, and we're going to have to survive for 2 more years. The question is, will he get reelected again in 2020?
What do you think?
Well, he certainly is running a campaign to try to do that. I don't know who would challenge him in his own party that has a chance, but it's a long period of time. We'll see who's really running in the Republican Party immediately after the midterm elections, though. We'll see what happens.
Well, Jim, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.